And so if I put this widget there, and then that widget over there, and then throw in 6 feet of padding, yeah, I think that's starting to look like an app. Oh, hi. Sorry, I didn't see you there. I'm just trying to work my way through this code lab in preparation for Flutter Day. And so I think we're ready. All I need is some state management. What do you think I should do, Dash? Wait, today is what day? Today is Flutter Day? Hi, I'm Fitz from the Flutter team. Whether you've been writing Flutter apps your whole life or just hearing the word widget for the first time today, Flutter Day is all about learning new things. I'll be with you at various points throughout the day, streaming to your device from my home office, but it won't just be me. We have a great schedule of talks, discussions, live streams from Flutter community members around the world, code labs, and most importantly, opportunities to get your questions answered from a variety of Flutter team members. For example, a question I often see is how to use Firebase for an app's backend data infrastructure. I don't even really know how to do it myself, but that's what today is for, learning. Suppose I wanted to create an app that could run in multiple places, but used the same data no matter what platform it was running on. Something like Firebase seems like a natural fit, but I have no idea where to start. Oh, you're right. There's a new code lab for that. Let's take a look. The code lab starts you out in an app for finding restaurants and reading or adding reviews. When it starts out, though, there's nothing. It just has the basic structures for the app, but no data behind it. The code lab walks through all of the steps required to get a Firebase project set up and then dives into the Flutter code to work with it. For example, here you'll start by setting up a stream to read in the snapshot of restaurants. And then on the consumer side of the stream, you'll create a stream subscription to pick up the data when it gets to the app. This, of course, smells like state, so that'll happen in a stateful widget. In init state, since the database doesn't really care who reads a list of restaurants, the app will sign into Firebase anonymously and set up a listener for the new snapshot of restaurant data. The data comes in is nicely structured, as you'd hope, but is in the form of just a generic document. To be nice to the rest of the app, it can be helpful to parse it out into a more defined object, like a list of restaurants. The rest of the app is already wired up to handle a list of restaurants, so all we should need to do now is rerun the app. How about in Chrome this time? And look at that, we've got some restaurants. Phew, all right. Thank you for your help, Dash. I think we should pause there and let folks work through the rest of it themselves. And thank you for tuning into our stream today and for helping each other learn new things and for your continued excitement and curiosity. For most of us, life is nowhere near the same as it was at the beginning of the year. It's come with new stresses, exacerbated prior stresses, and potentially included loss. Everyone's coping with this new normal in a different way and to different degrees. I've not yet made my own bread, but I did make my own dash. Our hope is that Flutter Day provides you with an opportunity to disconnect, learn something new about Flutter, and maybe even connect with others who are doing the same thing. Our stream will be here 3 times throughout the day. Right now, again halfway through, and once again right at the end. In between, we have lots of code labs, both new and refreshed, and we'll be with you all day in the Flutter Community Slack workspace to help answer questions and provide code lab support off camera. Each stream segment is centered around a particular theme: beautiful UI, and then tooling, and then Dart, with a short talk on the topic, followed by a live question and answer segment with various members of the Dart and Flutter teams joining in to help answer the questions you've given us on hashtag AskFlutter. And if you're wondering what to do with this full day of learning, Hack 20, the online international Flutter hackathon run by the Flutter community, starts right after we wrap up. And speaking of wrapping up, as you learn and experiment with new things in Flutter, it can be exciting and rewarding to share those things with others, something you can and should do in the Slack channel. An amazing and recently made available way to do that, Flutter on CodePen. And with that, again, welcome to Flutter Day. Thank you for joining us. And here's Zoe, Alex, and Mariano to tell us all about Flutter Pens.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zoe. I am a product manager on the Flutter team. So I will be your host for this session. And then we are going to talk about CodePen today. As some of you may be aware that CodePen recently launched a brand new custom Flutter editor. So with me today, I have 2 guests, Alex and Mariano. And let's welcome our first guest, Alex. Hey, Alex. How are you
Hey
doing?
Zoe. Good, good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here today. Alex, So why don't you just introduce yourself? Let us know who you are, where are you from?
Sure thing. I'm Alex Vasquez. I'm one of the co-founders of CodePen, and I'm super excited to share all the work that we've been doing with the Flutter team.
Thank you, Alex. Well, some of our audience today probably aren't too familiar with what CodePen is. Can you actually just tell us a little bit more about CodePen and maybe even show us?
Sure, I'd love to. So I'll show you what CodePen's like. CodePen is first and foremost an online social web community for front-end developers and designers. It's a place where anyone can join and share their work, test out their ideas, and simply be inspired. So when you come to CodePen, you'll see that you can see the great work people are doing on CodePen. You can follow other developers, and you can even show them some love for their work that they're doing. Now, all the pens on CodePen are editable, and you can fork them and play with them and even embed them in blog posts. And we try to make that super easy so that you can focus on learning and without the frustration of setting up your environments and configuration.
So, what we particularly love about CodePen is the social and community feature that offers. And that's why we're super excited to see that you guys are bringing in Flutter into this community. Actually, while you're on the screen, can you just walk us through how you would actually get to the Flutter editor?
Sure thing. So on CodePen, you have this active sidebar that kind of sticks with you. And so if you go to the create dropdown, you'll see that there's a little dropdown arrow and you can choose the custom Flutter editor that we've created. Normally on CodePen, you'd create HTML and CSS pens, but you can now start developing your own Flutter demos right on CodePen. And so we start you with a smart little widget. You know, my first language was Spanish, and so I always like to start with Hola Mundo instead of the
Nice.
typical hello world. But the moment you start typing in the Flutter editor on CodePen, you start to get feedback, and you see how everything starts re-rendering automatically. Now, I found a
That was
demo
very
on
quick.
yeah, it's really amazing what the technology that we've been able to leverage and what we've been able to build with your team. And so I found a little demo on Dartpad, and it was about playing with image blur. So I started playing with it, and so you can see just like the other example, the moment I start typing, I can start playing with it and I'll get feedback in an update. Now, this is a live view of a real web page that we're rendering. And so you can grab these pens, you can embed them in blog posts. So we have a little embed builder and we give you the exact code to embed into your Medium blog post, your personal blog post, your WordPress blog post. And you'll see an example of what it looks like here. And so we're really excited to be able to introduce this awesome technology to our community.
That looks great. Thank you so much for walking us through the journey. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know that you guys are startup. Making the investment in building this custom Flutter editor must be a big, must probably take a lot of resource from you guys. So I wonder, how did you decide that you want to add Flutter um, among other frameworks? Just tell me a little bit
S-
more about the motivation behind the
Yeah,
scenes.
so it was a really big deal for us. You know, we don't support a ton of additional frameworks beyond what we've initially supported. And so it was a bit of a departure, but we love introducing our users to new technology that empowers them to be both bold and productive. And Flutter does both of those things. So when with Flutter embracing the web and all the excitement around it, when we found out that we could work with your team, the same team that built Dartpad, we knew that it would be a really great fit, and the likelihood of us succeeding in deploying this project was very high, and that's exactly the way it worked out. But it was being able to work with a team like yours to deploy this to our users and make it the right fit for CodePen. That's how we decided to opt into Flutter.
Nice. Thank you so much. Actually, you mentioned about working with the DARPAT team. I'm actually a part of the DARPAT team. So I know that Copan was built, the Copan Flutter editor was built on top of the Dart services, which is the same service that powers the DARPAT backend. But our audience probably isn't that familiar with it. So I wonder if you can just like walk us through some high level technical architecture and let us
Sure.
know how you actually build a custom Flutter editor.
Sure. Yeah. So we were able, luckily for us, because the Dartpad itself is open source, we were able to kind of take a look at that, see what they were doing, and notice that, okay, we're doing a lot of similar things. And I knew that I could take advantage of kind of the backend services that you were already using. And so what we did is we pulled out some of the hard-coded configuration for our system, and we made sure that we were able to reuse the custom the editor that all CodePen developers are used to, but be able to abstract out using the Dartpad services. So for example, whenever we format code, we send it off to a Dartpad API whenever we analyze the code or compile the code. And so after that compilation and formatting is complete, we grab the response, put it together, and put together a real life web page. And that happens within seconds. And being able to do that and work with your team was great because it was very easy and smooth to get over all the technical hurdles that we faced.
Thank you. Actually, so I want to share a little background story. When we built Dartpad, we specifically decided we want to open source that Dart services. So, website like CodePen can take advantage of it. So in this particular case, we are not the expert in building social or community features, but you guys are. So I'm so glad that we actually did it. So now you can actually offer this additional tool to our Flutter community. So now our Flutter community has both Dartpad and also CodePen. If you want to go to, if you want to code up a quick concept or you want to test an idea, you can go to Dartpad. Or if you're looking for a design community, you're looking for inspirations of creative works, you should totally go to CodePen. So I'm so glad that we actually have both, resources and tools available to our Flutter developers.
Yeah, I mean, having Dartpad as an open source project was this amazing resource. We started CodePen 8 years ago, and since then, the web just continues to explode to the point where developers expect to be able to try new technology right in their
Yeah.
browser. There should be almost no lead time between releasing something and me being able to try it. And so, what we love is we like to think of the web is kind of like pizza, and CodePen and
Okay.
Dartpad, they're just like pizza places. And so when we see another pizza place pop up, we don't think, oh my, that's worrisome. We always think this is great because what it really means is people really love pizza. And so it's just been this really great collaboration with your team to be able to do this.
Thank you. I love your pizza analogy. I'll tell my team about it. That's really cute. Okay. Well, in the interest of time, I have one last question for you. Are there any changes that you're planning to put in this custom Flutter editor in the future? Do you mind sharing that plan with our audience today?
Sure thing. Yeah, we are really focused on making the actual editor experience a lot better for Flutter editors. Flutter editors, or I'm sorry, Flutter developers want the ability to have type ahead and intelligent error handling and error messaging, being able to look up documentation on demand, a lot of the niceties that you guys have already built into Dartpad. And so being able to bring those to CodePen, because that's kind of a foreign experience for us, that's what we're focused on, just the actual developer experience while they're learning this technology, that we want to enable them to be productive as quickly as possible. And so we're
These
super excited about that.
Yeah, these sound like really great features. We really look forward to seeing those. So, yeah, again, thank you, Alex, for being here today with
Thank
us.
you.
And please
Thanks for
keep us
having me.
posted as you hear more from your community or as you release new features on this CodePen Flutter editor. Well, next, let's welcome our second guest, Mariano. Hey, Mariano, how are you doing?
Hey, Zoe, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mariano. So I got to know Mariano from Twitter because he's been sharing a lot of amazing Flutter works. Mariano, why don't you give us a quick introduction about yourself?
Sure, I would love to. My name is Mariano Zorilla. I'm actually from Argentina. I've been doing Android apps, mostly mobile apps, for the past 10 years, and I'm currently a tech lead at Venmo. And I also part of several communities here in South America and also in San Francisco. Funny enough, I have the only Flutter community in San Francisco, so I'm pretty active between pretty much all the mobile community.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm really, really impressed. Actually, tell us a little bit more about your Flutter experience so far. What makes you so passionate about Flutter?
Sure, I would love to. I think I met Flutter around 3 years ago, but it didn't start right there. I started around 2 years ago with the Flutter Studio Jams that were set up around the globe. So I was making a small example. It wasn't the best code. No one liked their code even 6 months ago for how bad it was. But I keep learning. It was something interesting about Flutter, different from any other platforms that I experienced in the past. And I've been doing Android for 10 years, so I pretty much know any nitty gritty of it. But Flutter makes something special because I can just build one app, like code it once, and then have it in like on the web, which is a
Exactly.
platform
Yeah.
that I never touched in the past.
That's good to hear. Thank you so much. So, the reason why we want to bring Mariano to our show today is that I know that you have created like 18 or 20 different Flutter pins just within a 1 month, right? Am I right?
Yes, yes. I'm
Okay.
20 currently. I need to sleep. But
Wow.
no, kidding. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of on the past for the community. I think the community keeps encouraging me to do a lot more. But yeah, currently I'm on 20 CodePen examples since the day they was launched. I've been nonstop delivering examples.
I am really impressed. So, the reason why we want to bring you here is we want you to actually show some of the works that you have created. Show us some of the things that you are most proud of.
Sure, I would love to. I got several examples. I can start for the very for example that I did,
Let's do
which
it.
was super simple. It wasn't really complex. All I did was just follow around the mouse into the small characters that I have like on my current screen, and you can just pick on the eyes and just like it's gonna
Oh,
hide it,
really
and
cute.
you can see. Yeah, you can just wave a little bit. So I didn't know the limits of copying at the moment, so I need to see what I can and cannot do, so then I could just push the limits a little bit more. Then I created a small example, like a small handheld device that you can change the background and the colors. So you can see a little bit transparent, and you can just swipe the different cartridges that it has, like a small video that it has in the application. But then I see it's like, how can I break it even more? Like testing Copen to the limits. So in this example that I have like a car sharing app, I merged two copens into one crazy idea that I have. So I got like the Google Maps on the background, which is a copen, and then I put the Flutter on top of it. I merged both of them, and I managed to get like a little car on the screen and the user location and all that kind of stuff. But then I was like, okay, which one is really popular? And I start making like chat apps pretty much, different famous ones that I have, which you can actually use it. You can, if you even type and say it's like hello, and you send a message, or you even if you see details from them, you can see it. Well, the great thing about it is that I noticed even with GoPen is like it was so fast. It works like if it was actually building a web app, so I can use the media query, which detects the width of the screen currently. So I can switch between more like a desktop, tablet, and mobile UI without any hiccups. So I can make all those changes and examples, and the UI adapts from all those changes. I'm also
Wow.
have like a working chat app that I also doing, and I'm testing things like different animations and even animated GIF that I put it on the screen, and it's working without any single problems. And also this one has a new UI which changed it in the middle of me actually doing the example, but it's working perfectly, no issues at all. And I'm really proud of like how worked this, like I did it really fast, and it didn't take me too much to share it to the community.
Wow. So I'm just really curious, how long did it take you to create these pins? Um, does that take a lot of your time or did that take a lot of code?
It depends on the app. I would say, depending on the example that I did. The first one, it take around 300, 400 lines. The small examples, you got a background and the small images, and that's it. But like you say, you start making more complex apps, like a
Yeah.
full web and chat apps. Those are taken between, I'll say 1,500 and 2,700 lines of code, which translate into 10 to 20 hours around
Wow,
ish.
just 10 to 20
So
hours. Wow, that's
yes.
crazy.
So people think that I take like weeks or so.
Yeah.
Some people even suggest to me, it's like, how do you build that in 2 days? First of all, I don't sleep. No, just kidding.
Oh,
I take my free time to do it, but I really enjoy it. Actually, I really enjoy doing it. It only takes me 1, 2 days, and to share it to the community so they can take that example and make their own versions, maybe.
that's crazy. Thank you so much for using that. So as a heavy user of the Flutter Copan editor, what is your favorite feature? Tell us about it.
Sure, I will have to say mostly the social features because I
Hmm.
love to do Medium posts about the different works and codes that I can do with Flutter, and the fact that I can embed the my Flutter examples on Copen, it just put like the URL that I put it on Medium, and I can see like real time interactions. That means that people without an IDE they can actually use and interact with Flutter
Yeah.
without any problem. And then they can actually comment on the code pen. They can actually like if they wanted, or they can, like you say, like copy the code, put in their own code pen, make the changes that they wanted. So I would say that all the aspect of the social community aspect of it, I really
Mhm.
love it.
Yeah, I'm actually so glad that you mentioned about the social aspect of it because that's exactly what we love about Copan. And that's also something that DARPA didn't offer. So I wonder that since you have shared the Flutter pens on a lot of social media, what kind of feedback have you been getting from your followers?
I mostly start posting then on Twitter. I get a lot
Hmm.
of like retweets and likes and a lot of people
Yeah,
feedback.
that's
It's
how
like,
I got
wow,
to
this
know
is
you.
amazing. Yes. So a lot of people start like messaging me. It's like, wow, this is amazing. I didn't know like Flutter was capable. Some people didn't even know what Flutter was until I start showing a lot of those examples and retweeted by the community. Fun
Hmm.
fact, I start posting on LinkedIn, which is a platform that I don't normally share any content,
Oh,
and I
okay.
get like even better responses than on Twitter. People actually wanting to use either in their side projects or maybe suggesting at work. Like one friend that is working on a big company says like the CTO wants to talk with you because maybe they want to implement Flutter for some examples.
Wow,
And I
that's
think that's
really
an even
impressive.
better response on Twitter because they people actually want it for do it for work, which is amazing.
Well, I really hope that with more and more folks asking you about Flutter on LinkedIn, and they will be seriously consider Flutter for their, for their commercial apps. That's great. So I'm curious, what is your next Flutter pen idea that you plan to work on?
Oof, I don't know. I have so many in my head.
Oh,
I normally stack a lot of examples in my head, but I try to tackle the big ones because a lot of people feel intimidated. They think they have so many developers and so many like designers that it's impossible to do these UIs. And I wanted to show that even with 1,000 lines of code in 1 or 2 days, I can actually recreate those UIs
hmm.
and maybe break a little bit more like that imposter syndrome that a lot of people have that think I'm not able to do this, and just sharing them that they're capable. Don't worry, you can do it with Flutter. It's so easy to do it with Flutter, and that's part of why I like to do so. Like mostly the big names, if you want to call it.
That's great. Great. Thanks for sharing that idea. So before we wrap up, any words of wisdom that you would like to share with our audience today?
Yes, feel free to use all my examples. I think one of the amazing things that not many languages have is the ability to test on the web, even on your mobile device. You can open one of my
Hmm.
URLs, take one of my examples, and test Flutter and see how powerful it is. Because the same code that I have in Copen, you can throw it up later on Android Studio, on VS Code. You can actually run on device, and even better because the performance once it's built is way better than the
Hmm.
examples that you see there. So if my examples with the limited resource work so good and encourage people to do like coding, maybe they weren't coding in the past, or they maybe didn't decided to take into a new direction or a new technology. And if I can do that for a lot of people and change their careers, I'm going to continue doing so.
That's actually a great point because I often get questions from different people asking how is Flutter difficult to learn? Is Dart difficult to learn? How different is Flutter from other frameworks? So I would say just give it a try. Like now you have Copan. Try to see some of the samples that Mariano and other experts have built. Fork it, make it your own version. So you actually get to see the power of Flutter before deciding you want to spend the time in installing the SDK. So definitely take advantage of that. Again, Mariano, thank you very much for being here today and sharing your amazing works. We're really, really impressed. And also, please continue to help us support Flutter in the community.
Thank you so much for having me. Sure, I will continue making more examples.
Thank you, Mariano. Well, for our audience today, if you're watching this session, I have a challenge for you. Go to the Copen Flutter Editor, create a Flutter pen, and share your work on social media with the hashtag FlutterPen. And then we look forward to seeing great works from you. That being said, that's it for the Copen session. Next up, I'm going to turn you over to the Ask Flutter team. We're hosting a live Q&A session, and please turn your questions to Twitter or YouTube using hashtag AskFlutter. We hope you enjoy a great Flutter day. Bye bye now.
Welcome everyone to our first Ask Flutter segment of the day. We've got the chat open for live questions, and some of the folks from the team are there to help you out. While you're in there, please keep in mind our community guidelines. Everyone is coming into this day with a different background and a different experience. So something you see as new and expected might be new and exciting for someone else. Take that opportunity to build up the excitement and support each other. With that, let's get to some Ask Flutter questions. Our first guest of the day is John Ryan, an engineer from the Flutter team. John, welcome.
Hey, Fitz, it's good to be here.
Great, excellent. So we saw some really cool things there from Alex and Mariana with CodePen, and that almost feels related to our first question here. And we have a question from Kamashi from Twitter, who is asking if there's any online platform which will ensure the development of apps using Flutter without installing anything. IDEs eat up RAM and slow things down. So do we have any options for online development of Flutter?
Yeah, that was actually the impetus for adding Flutter support to Dartpad. We've all ran code labs or helped people get set up with Flutter, and we know it'd be just that much easier if we didn't have to go through those steps like that, installing the SDK and things. So that's what Dartpad is. It supports the material package and the Cupertino package, and CodePen also uses the same infrastructure as we saw. So there's also little experiments that we're looking at on using VS Code Online potentially, but there's nothing really to say on that yet. So there's a lot of issues with having a full Flutter setup on the web. There's debugging, there's getting it building on iOS and Android potentially, or submitting to the App Store. There's a lot that you need a physical machine to do. But yeah, that would be awesome if we could make that even better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely hear that there's at some point a need for an IDE in some ways once you get into the bigger apps and the full-fledged development. But for getting started, things like Dartpad and CodePen and maybe Online Visual Studio, if we can get there, like those are great ways to get started, for sure. And so like you personally, like are there interesting things that you've seen come out of Dartpad or CodePen that you find really inspiring from a beautiful UI perspective, or like, wow, I had no idea we could do that on Dartpad even though we built the thing?
Certainly the things Mariano just showed really showcases what you can do with just using the material package and a few other things. Image blurring is great. I work a little bit with the web team, and so the infrastructure that runs CodePen is all built using Flutter for Web, and so any improvement to that goes directly into CodePen and Dartpad. So there's tons of wonderful things that the team is doing just to make everything that the Flutter SDK supports run on the web, and it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. It's really kind of amazing to see what people can build and what's out there. And so I think our next question, multiple people asked it across the internet, and I feel like it's going to come up again, but I want to talk about it first. What do we recommend for state management these days? What are your thoughts on it, and have they evolved over time?
Yeah, this is a question we might also see Philip give his perspective on, but my perspective on this is that we have a state management best practices article on the Flutter website, and we do recommend provider to provide and access objects or other data throughout your Flutter app. So the way I think about it is there's kind of two aspects. There's the dependency getting and providing that provider does, and there's also what type of objects am I using. I prefer to use just plain old Dart objects, just classes with data in them, but a lot of people prefer immutable data structures and things like that to make sure that they're not editing memory that some other widget would be using unexpectedly.
Yeah, and I think something for me that goes along with that is use what works for you. And so at different stages of your app development, or even for different apps, there's going to be different ways that are going to work for state management. Some ways are going to be extraordinarily simple. just have a stateful widget and keep your state as local as possible. And then you can build up from there as you need it. But once you do get to a certain level of complexity, some of these other solutions are excellent, like Provider. So yeah, we will definitely get Philip's take on it later. I think it'll be really interesting to see what everyone's take on it is throughout the day. I know it's always evolving, it's always changing. And so speaking of changes, I do want to bring this back. And we've talked about state and we've talked about online things, bringing us back to UI and building really cool UIs. Things change. We have different platforms. We can support different platforms, and there are different sizes of devices. And anyone who's familiar with web design is familiar with this concept of responsive layouts and where we can change the size of the window and our widgets move around, even if they're just elements rather than widgets or whatever you call them for whatever you're doing. And so we saw a number of questions about this. In particular, and I'm definitely going to butcher this, but ArcD14 asks, how are we supposed to scale a Flutter website for phone and desktop? And so to me, that really rings about the responsive layout, about how do we build one code base for both of them, but still have a nice layout in that matches both of them. What are your takes on that idea?
Yeah, it's really easy in Flutter, but there's a few different ways to do it. So using a media query and getting the size of the full app is one way to do that. So if you know the full size of the screen that you're showing and you want to know that to change the layout, media query is one way to go. I've also seen Layout Builder used a lot for this, and what Layout Builder does is it provides you a callback with the incoming constraints. So in Flutter, the constraints are passed down, and the widget's job is to provide the size back up to the parent. And so Layout Builder gives you a hook into that process to say, oh, if the constraints are such that I need to be 500 pixels wide, maybe I should make myself only 300 pixels wide so that the user can read the text. So Layout Builder is super useful for that. And I would also add that, well, yeah, let's just call it there. I think that's a good answer.
Fair enough. Yeah, and I think I saw one of our teams from around Google who are building things with Flutter. That a nice development strategy there is to every day test and do your development on a different device. So whether you're doing it on a Chrome window or a very tiny Android phone or a very large iOS phone or device, it's a nice way to kind of just see those different screens in play in reality, rather than I'm building on my one emulator all the time, and then at some point in the future, I'm going to try it on a different sized emulator. And at some point after that, I'll try it on a tablet or whatever else. And so I thought that was a really interesting development strategy of saying, just today, I'm going to develop on the large device. Tomorrow, I'll develop on the small device and see how those differ. It's kind of an interesting way to think about it when you're actually going to build it.
Yeah, I use IntelliJ, and so I have multiple configurations set up in certain cases, and I actually sometimes have different devices running at the same time, kind of what Chris showed at Flutter Live, the Flutter Octopus. I have usually iOS, maybe web running, and a lot of people are starting to use desktop because you don't need to have an emulator.
Right. Yeah. And I kind of demonstrated the multi-device thing this morning too, in the intro, looking at that code lab where I started off in the iOS emulator and then opened it up in Chrome afterwards, and that worked really well. As you saw, I just like ran flutter run-d Chrome and it opened up the same app there, and there was no trickery there. I just ran the command and it worked. So it was a really neat way to test out those multiple devices.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So looking at our some of our live questions, and so we have a question here from and throughout the day. I apologize if I get any names wrong, but I'm going to do my best as well as I can with the live questions. But we have Sambo Visal, who asks, what are the things that I need to know to consider myself as a senior Flutter developer?
That is a very hard question.
Yeah.
I don't even think I know the answer to that. But I would just add that if you're building an app, if you've shipped an app to the App Store, that's a big accomplishment. That if you've written a real app that you and your users love, that's what you want to be doing, and that's considered senior in my book. But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I don't know that there's any like one topic or one feature or bit of technology that I would say once you've mastered this thing, now you are a senior developer. I don't know if that really exists because you can do a reasonable app without going too complex and too detailed into various Flutter widgets and things. And so, yeah, I think I'd pretty much agree that like if you've launched something in production, that's a pretty good signal. And naturally, anyone can launch things on most of the app stores, but I think then a turning point is how successful is it, quote unquote. Do you have users? As you said, do you have users who love the thing as well? That's a good signal. That's great.
Yeah, it's all about what your goals are.
Yes. Exactly. So I'm just kind of skimming some of the other live questions that we've gotten so far. In the meantime, one of our questions from hashtag #AskFlutter over the last couple of weeks was from Anuj in India, who says, "How do we cope with frequent changes in the syntax and behavior of different widgets?"
Yeah, so we do have a page with breaking changes now, which is great. I think if you just Google breaking changes Flutter, we have a page on flutter.dev that we maintain. We do try to deprecate things. So we do try to mark things as deprecated, meaning maybe don't use this because you might upgrade next time a new release comes out and it might be gone. That recently happened with a lot of the text and layout, or sorry, the themes in a Flutter app. So we changed like the text theme names from things like headline 4 to body 1 and things like that. And the process there was to mark them as deprecated, and then after a period of time, remove the old ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that mention of the new breaking changes page, just as a way to kind of see what is breaking rather than having to, I run Flutter upgrade and now my IDE is complaining about all of the different changes that are broken. So it's a nice way to know definitively what's been changed. And okay, so with CodePen and DartPad, we've mentioned Flutter Web a number of times. There's been a lot of people asking about it, both in the live stream chat and on Twitter and elsewhere, just generally about web. And we'll set aside for the moment the question of whether we're moving it out of beta into stable or anything like that. For the moment, I just want to look at learning about Flutter for Web, because today is all about learning and building new things. And so Katura Ovio from, I don't have a location, asks that we need more code labs and tutorials for Flutter for Web. Can you point us to the right resource?
We actually have a new code lab for you guys today. And that code lab walks you through a simple app that has a few routing things and displays the number of GitHub stars for a repository, which is kind of fun. So it demonstrates a few things, but if you're someone wondering, will HTTP work, or how do I deploy a web app to Firebase, that code lab is certainly something to check out. It uses Firebase hosting to host the web app.
Right. Yeah. So that's nice. It gets you out of that just purely local development where, yes, you can run Flutter on -d Chrome and that's fine, but how do I actually get a real website up and running? Firebase hosting is a great way to look at that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so looking at all of our Ask Flutter questions, which, by the way, everyone watching, thank you so much for all of your Ask Flutter questions. That's super valuable and gives us things to talk about. So I really appreciate all of your questions. And we had a lot of questions from people who were asking about first-class support for SVG. And so I noticed you had looked up a little bit of information about that. So what does that look like? What does first-class support for SVG look like?
Yeah, this is an issue that has been around a while. There is a GitHub issue to track this if you want to follow that, follow the discussion there. The way we approach things like this is there is a third-party package for this, and you can file issues against that, contribute in that way. It's very much a community-run effort. But it does exist and it does work. The SVG API is very large, and there's a lot of edge cases that to call something a stable SVG library is difficult. And I think there's some smaller difficulties getting that to work in Flutter. But yeah, the way we approach that is investing in something like that is a big investment for our team. And so we want to make sure that it's something that gives a lot of impact and has a lot of impact on a lot of users before we fully support and maintain something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the challenges I've seen with SVG too is that it's one of those things that's kind of standard, but everyone does it a little bit differently. And so we need to balance like which of those edge cases do we actually look into. And there's, as you said, there's a lot of them for SVG.
Mm-hmm. And there's tools coming out now like Rive and others from Adobe that can do a similar thing and convert to Flutter.
Right.
I
Yep.
understand.
So looking at our questions coming in live, we have one from Megan, who is asking, I'm using Flutter to create an app that works with a robot. Do you have any examples or resources for this? So creating an app that works with a robot. I could see it's a couple different angles on that. Is it what is your take on it first, and then I'll give mine.
That sounds very cool. You should tell us more about your robot.
Absolutely. Number one, it's really, really, really interesting.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the details are, so it's a little bit hard to answer that. But there was a talk last year from Emily and Matt on this LED wig that Emily built. So using a Flutter app to control IoT devices. So you might want to check that out if you're curious.
Yeah, and I know for that, so it really depends on what the control interface for your robot is, and what kind of communication mechanism you're implementing there. But for that wig in particular, I believe they used Bluetooth to communicate between the IoT device and the Flutter app. And if you check out that talk, it was from OSCON, the open source conference, from a couple of years ago, and they walk through the whole thing, and it's great. It's really interesting. And I don't know if we have any other definitive resources on that idea in particular.
Yeah, I don't think we have any official docs on that.
Yeah. All right. So continuing on through our live questions, we have Free to Mind is asking, says, hey Flutter team, why is there no documentation on Firebase website for how to use Flutter? There's an example for even Unity, but not Flutter. Why is that? So I will say that for starters, Yes, you're right. Thank you for pointing that out. And we are working with the Firebase team to get more docs on there, and more resources. In particular, the code lab that I was showing off this morning is a good example of that. Using Firebase Firestore for providing the backing data for a Flutter app. Which works great across multiple platforms. And so that's a good start. But I recognize it's not quite enough. So we're working with the Firebase team to get more out there. In the meantime, the Flutter Fire package and the repo for it are also a great resource to get started with. So that's my 2 cents. John, do you have anything to add on about Firebase support with Flutter?
Yeah. So the only thing I would add is that it does work on web now. So you can set up Firebase in a Flutter project in a way that runs on web, iOS, and Android. So we recently did this in the Flutter samples repo. There's an experimental sample there that we worked on.
Cool. Yeah, I know it's a question that we often get a lot on just how do you get Firebase working with Flutter? So it's great that we're building out resources to help with that question and to get more about it. So I want to go back to some of our Twitter questions that we got beforehand. And there was a couple questions, and I've seen this come up a couple of times in previous things as well, where people are asking what a build context is. I see it come up everywhere. It's in all of my widgets build methods, but I have no idea what it is. Sometimes I pass it to a media query. Sometimes I pass it to a navigator. It's just like, it's what the docs tell me to do. I don't know what it is. So what is it?
Yeah. So the docs do kind of explain it, but I can try to explain it how I think about it, which is that it is a point in the widget tree. So if you have a stateful widget, it's actually a handle to the parent widget in your build tree. So if I'm building a widget, a lot of things like getting the theme for a particular widget, that uses the build context, because you could imagine potentially one part of your app using one theme and one part of your app using a different theme. So how would you do that? Well, that's why you have this way of getting the theme, which is theme.of. And what theme.of does is it takes your build context, which is the point in the widget tree that you are at, and it goes up the tree and it figures out where the closest theme object is in that tree to give you the right theme for where you are.
Right. So it goes as far up as it needs to go to find the thing that you need.
Yeah, exactly.
Another way that I heard this described, and I think it was Philip who was describing this to me the other day, who was saying that when you start to look more deeply into Flutter, you notice that a widget is immutable. It cannot be changed. It's just a configuration for a thing. And then, so if it's immutable, that means it itself cannot hold any information about where in the tree it is. So it doesn't know its parents. It doesn't know its children. And so the way it knows that is there's other trees. There's an element tree. And that's the kind of thing that manages where the widgets are and their relationships and what the render object is. So that's a whole nother tree that we won't talk about for the moment. But those elements, that element, if that is maintaining the current information about the relationships between widgets, it's in some ways the context. Because it's the one that has the notion of where do I go to go up and define that thing. So it's an interesting way to think about it, as saying this is just this other part of the tree.
Yeah, exactly. It's a separate data structure.
That can change depending on where you are.
Yeah, we won't talk about keys just yet, but
no, not today. I mean, unless it comes up, I only read like one or two questions ahead of time, so maybe it'll come up in the future. Yeah. We'll see. We only have a couple minutes, So it's as I mentioned a moment ago, everyone starts to ask about Firebase. So we have another live question about Firebase specifically. So UX Ninja with 3 A's is asking if it's possible to interact with Firebase ML Kit in a Flutter app.
I don't see why not. I don't know if there is a plugin for that actually. But if someone has a link, please share in the chat. I would love to check that out. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, and I know it's been done to a certain degree before. I know Matt produced a video with face detection a while back in Flutter, and I was able to rerun it after it was an old enough sample app that it needed some upgrading and some fiddling around, but it did work, and it did have MLKit with face detection in the app, and yeah, it seemed to work just fine. So I believe that's also part of the Flutterfire repo. So UX Ninja, if you want to check out that repo, it should be in there. And that we got from the internet. And so it kind of gets into our next session later in the day about performance, but this question comes from Demian, who is asking a specific question about what is the best way to optimize images with Flutter, but not shrink, but also maybe some compression, and specifically, like, is there any WebP support or anything like that? What about images? I know when we're talking about beautiful UIs and great UIs, there's a lot of images usually. What do you think?
Yeah, this is honestly not my area of expertise, but I did see that WebP is supported as far as I can tell. As far as optimizing images goes, yeah, you want to make sure that you're testing on all screens. You want to make sure that you're not getting a blurry image in your app on one screen and a sharper image on another screen or another size. So we provide all the capabilities to do that, and there are some recommendations around this. So I think on iOS, you usually add an image at 2x and things like that in your assets. So there is some best practices around that. I'm not an expert on this topic, but yeah, I think yeah, we provide all that. If there's a specific issue, then feel free to file one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen other techniques too around when you have your image server serving the images, you can have it get different sizes as well, and so then it's on your image server to be able to provide that compression rather than having that compression being done on the front end, because front end, whether you're on mobile or web or whatever, typically has less resources than the back end. So it's a nice way to kind of offload that effort to something else.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Not everything is an asset. Some things are loaded dynamically.
Yep. Especially when you're looking at like maybe an e-commerce store or an image viewing app or something, where you really don't know ahead of time what those images are, you are going to have some of that dynamic loading.